Hey, how's it going, everybody? So, yeah, I wanted to fire up this space and kind of give you guys an update on a couple businesses, particularly Swan, from my perspective. I do want to say that I don't think like Corey is an evil person or anything. Like he's that bad of a guy, but and it is kind of disappointing. I mean, I would have called him a friend, but I've gotten kind of used to this over the last few years. Um, and what it comes down to is that it's really hard to run a successful business in Bitcoin, and I don't think people are, super evil for being in a situation where they start compromising their ethics. Right? I think it's human and it's natural. Especially if you're in a tough spot to do stuff that you'll regret later, and that is maybe not the best stuff to do. But I mean that doesn't mean that we shouldn't like say, hey, you're not the worst person in the world, but also raise the alarm, right? Um, and I do think it's worth talking about from a couple different standpoints. One is that a lot of us have pushed people to Swan over the years, um, even though the fees are higher, because we could count on them for good education, right? As like Bitcoin only, they're going to encourage people to just DCA in, um, and they're only going to get exposed to good Bitcoin content, right? And there's been some flubs here and there, like freaking scam love, being a Swan guy and then selling out and things like that. But by and large, they were you could count on them for that, right? And so I would send friends and family to Swan rather than Strike, to get them started, because Strike is great, but it doesn't have a ton of educational content. So that was the value add, right? Even though the fees were high, and I can't do that anymore in good conscience, and I wouldn't recommend anybody else either, because Twitter and Twitter Spaces is a big part of their education. And to the degree that they're going to promote, rank scammers like Brad Mills or whatever his name is, um, that's no longer makes sense, right? Like you don't want to send friends and family to Swan thinking that they're going to be taken care of, and then they end up following people on Swan and end up in a space. Like 3 days ago, I was in a space with Corey. Again, we've been relatively friends, right? So he invited me to come on as a speaker. There's a lot of people in the room. It's a good time. And then Brad, is trying to say that shit coins are going to last forever, right? And I try to explain that that's not the case, and that Brad is actually just a shitcoin scammer, right? If you look at my feed, I retweeted earlier a pretty good montage of him with Richard Hart, of all people, right? Talking about how he invested in Hex. So, um, and Corey interrupted and said, "Oh, I'm not going to allow any personal attacks on Brad." All right, I'll let that go. I already said my piece, right? And I've been pretty generous, I think, with Corey over the years, letting him pick his battles, right? Like he's stood up for some pretty unpopular things. Like he's pushed hard against the stock to flow model. Was that because he's doesn't run a trading exchange and it doesn't fit well with DCA? I don't know, but I thought it was pretty admirable, so I was supportive of that. And he's done a lot of good things over the years that I don't want to take away from him, but that's pretty, it was pushing my limits. So then I see this montage of Brad Mills, and it's so blatant, right? That I can't think that Corey is just accidentally looking the other way. Like he knows exactly what's going on. So I tweeted that out this morning and said, "Hey, Corey, you probably shouldn't let this guy be a speaker in your spaces." And then we went back and forth in DMs, and he basically ended up blocking me, with some really pathetic excuses around why Brad is not that bad of a guy, right? Oh, he just trades shitcoins for Bitcoin. He just this, he just that, right? He just tells people he made a bunch of money on these shitcoins. He's not actually trying to encourage them to buy shitcoins. It's like, come on, we've been around way too long to make such pathetic arguments. So, yeah, I mean, I think that as much as I'd like Swan to be successful, I can't trust them not to encourage people to end up on scams. And their fees are really higher, right? So what value proposition do they offer at this point? Like, what are they bringing to the table? I would say nothing. The strike guys are not promoting Brad Milscan. They're not promoting people that are promoting Hex. They're not like, as I was tweeting out, hey, you probably shouldn't let this guy be a speaker anymore. At that very moment, he was a speaker in a room with what is JP, whatever, the the redheaded, I don't know, guy that makes redheaded comedian guy, right? Conservative or libertarian comedian. So it's Corey in there bringing his audience. You've got that JP guy, and sure enough, there's Brad talking about whatever he's talking about. But clearly, it encourages people to follow him, to get to know him, and then end up in shitcoins. And I can't see any moral distinction between that and having Roger Ver in the room and inviting him up as a speaker, and having people eventually end up in the Bitcoin Cash sales funnel. It's I don't know what the distinction can possibly be there. Um, so pretty disappointing, but it is what it is. And the other angle I would say is, and part of the reason that I'm sympathetic to them, let's say being more morally flexible, is their business isn't very healthy, right? They're all like Strike and Swan and a couple others. They're all built on the same back end. So like the back end technology of holding the Bitcoin and custodying and all that, that's all outsourced. The thing that so like Swan, they don't even hold your Bitcoins, right? So the whole value proposition was just their front end and just their educational experience, and maybe that justified higher fees for a while. It was also DCA, but I think DCA is kind of dead. I think the solution now is to get on zero, which Strike and Cash make that pretty easy, and banks rolling out the ability to buy and sell Bitcoin makes that super easy as well. Chase may be giving Strike a run for its money soon because you'll be able to swap in and out of Bitcoin with, maybe low fees, right? So where does that leave Swan? Well, it's not a very healthy business. I think it would be the conclusion that you would come to. And that is what I'm being told in DMs as well, is that they're struggling financially. They've got investors, all over the place. I don't know how many total investors they have, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was 100. That's not normal. That's not how Silicon Valley startups usually work. And some of those guys are super shady, like Mike Alfred, whose nickname is Mike Alfraud. It doesn't sound like Brad. Corey said that Brad was not an investor, but I'm sure if you go down the list, if Mike Alfraud is an investor, you're going to find some other pretty shady guys. And so, not a real healthy business, I would say. And they've compromised to the point where I can't, in good conscience recommend them. And then if you're self-custody or if they're holding your Bitcoin, that's the other angle, right? And I've been talking about this with Coinbase and everybody else for quite a while. If you're going to let somebody else hold your Bitcoin, you better make sure that that's a healthy business, right? You better be very interested if their stock starts tanking, right? Or if they're having, I think you should be very interested if the head of the SEC and Coinbase is fighting on Twitter, and you've got Bitcoin held by Coinbase. That's not a good sign, right? It should make you nervous enough to pull your coins off the exchange. So I would say it would, and this isn't going to hurt Swan's business, by the way, right? Like if you want to continue to buy on Swan and support them and pay higher fees because you still disagree with me that there's any educational risk, and you still think the education's worth it, fine. And I don't think they would even tell you they want you to have your Bitcoin held on the exchange, right? So you can take this part of the advice and still think that I'm just way overreacting and an asshole and whatever. And that advice is, look, I have serious questions about the viability of the business. I can't in good conscience recommend them anymore. I've sent, dozens of people to them, and it probably makes sense given that to be, let's say a little bit more diligent and not having them hold your Bitcoin, whether you buy it on there or not. So that's kind of my overall spiel on Swan, and we can talk about Cold Card later. But I guess we got some speakers up, so I'll give you guys a chance to chime in.
Has anyone else besides yourself really cried wolf or called these people publicly before?
Actually, I just saw a tweet. Not that I'm aware of, because I was completely in the dark that it was even a problem. Right? I didn't know that Corey was doing stuff like this, and I guess I can talk to why I think he's doing this also, because it's obviously not great for his business. But I wasn't aware that this stuff was going on until a couple of days ago. And like I said, I've known Corey for a lot of years and DM'd with him and had some private chats with him on audio, over the years. So I'm not aware of anybody that has, because then it would have drawn my attention to it sooner. But Dieter Bob has also called Corey out for this morning. So you can always count on that guy to not kiss the butt of people that are getting a little shady. But other than that, I think as far as I know, as far as I've noticed, like we're kind of the only two people that are drawing attention to it right now.
Hey, are you guys familiar with a group called Coin Homes that lets people leverage Bitcoin for like a fiat loan to get a house? I'm trying to figure out if it's legitimate, and I can't figure it out.
It's not a good idea. You definitely, I mean, there's this kind of ties back into the overall discussion about Swan and Cold Card and these guys. There's very few like good business models in Bitcoin. It's really a community driven revolution, right? And it's not obvious that there would be a lot of ways to make money off of something like that, right? Like the core stuff that you need to rely on is open source free software. And then, you do need to buy Bitcoin, right? You need to get your hands on Bitcoin, but there's not a whole lot of room for making a business out of that. Which is, come on, if we were to be very critical, would we really say like an exchange that charges higher fees but provides good education is really gonna be a rocket ship? No, right? Like nobody really thought like when Strike, who is a clear competitor of Swan, right? When Strike is onboarding nation states, nobody's getting excited about being an investor in Swan, right? I don't think so at all. Maybe you're thinking that all shit, it's a rising tide lifts all boats sort of situation, but it's they're clearly competitors, and one is providing you the ability to buy and sell Bitcoin with absolutely no fees, and the other is charging such high fees that frankly, the spaces that I've done, they've all been oriented mostly towards getting on zero fiat, which means you don't own any US dollars, right? So if you have to pay somebody, you need to sell Bitcoin. And if you get paid in fiat, then you just immediately convert it to Bitcoin. And that works flawlessly on Strike, right? That's a killer use case. You can treat Strike as if it's just part of your checking account, which again, the banks are going to be bolting this feature on. Star Bank, I think, just announced they're rolling this out soon. Maybe they already rolled it out. I'm not sure, but I haven't seen any screenshots of it. But the smart thing to do in a hyperinflation situation is anytime somebody gives you this worthless paper, you immediately convert it to Bitcoin. And you don't hold any of this trash paper. If somebody wants the trash paper, you only convert from Bitcoin to the trash paper right before you give it to them, because you don't want to own an asset that's so worthless, right? Any longer than you have to. So you just treat it as something to facilitate payments. And that works great on Strike. Even Cash App, at least they have an angle, because even though there's fees involved, they have a card and it's a great user experience. So I use those too, but I try to do everything on Strike because the fees are so much better. So that's what I recommend. What I don't recommend is any of these other businesses these other business models, right? So like one of the reasons that we were so happy with Swan for so long is that it wasn't a shitcoin casino, right? You had Cash App, and it wasn't a shitcoin casino, but it did have stonks, and those are shitcoin-ish, right? Like they're definitely not as good of an investment for the average Joe as Bitcoin. Um, so it did have that going for it, but that's not, there's plenty of Bitcoin-only exchanges, and Strike being the I think the 800-pound gorilla. Um, so all of the other businesses in the space, almost all the other businesses in the space suck, and they're not safe. I wouldn't want to be an investor in them, and they're doing really shady stuff. So you've got Shitcoin Casino, that's a business model. The SEC's coming after that hard. That's probably going to die. You've got buying and selling Bitcoin, very legitimate, right? It's like the only kind of legitimate business that's existed, I would say, other than some really innovative stuff with like Blockstream. But even so
Do you know of another
so you
service
got the
for?
shitcoin
I'm trying to
casinos.
find a way to mortgage a house and use Bitcoin as collateral because, like, I'm trying to
Yeah,
bridge
you
the
really
world where I'm like, how do I do
so
this in real life? And
yeah, so that's what I'm trying to get to. So then there's other businesses where you can borrow against your Bitcoin, right? Is how they phrase it. Or it's basically like a scam where they tell you can have your cake and eat it too. You can deposit this Bitcoin with us. We'll hold it for you, but it's still your Bitcoin. And then we'll loan you money and you can either buy more Bitcoin or you can buy something else, right? And the problem with that is that you don't actually own Bitcoin anymore. You've given up Bitcoin, which is this incredible asset that like nation states couldn't seize from you without torturing you. And even then, if you've set it up right, they can't even get it then, right? For something that's totally different. It's an asset that has totally different properties. So when you give, BlockFi your Bitcoin, and they say, okay, here's a bunch of cash that you can buy a house with. It doesn't matter what you're going to buy with it, right? You no longer own that Bitcoin. They give you an IOU, right? And it has completely different properties. You've got interest payments that have to be made on it. If the price of Bitcoin fluctuates, they can automatically sell your Bitcoin for you, forced liquidations. I've had friends that took it on the chin that way. So the reality is no, there's nobody right now that offers a service that will lend you money on your Bitcoin, because that would be like lending you money on your house. You keep the house, you have possession of the house. If you don't make your payments, then they have legal recourse to try to seize those assets. Okay, that's taking a loan on your Bitcoin. None of these services do that. All
Have
these
you seen
services
this
use
group,
tricky
Coin Homes?
words.
I think they're really trying to do
Yeah,
that.
let me finish. What they're doing is they're allowing you to give them up. You're giving them Bitcoin, right? So imagine you could take your house and put it in your pocket and then give it to them, and they kept it, and you had to hope that if you made your payments and ended up paying off the loan, they would give you the house back. That's a totally different relationship. And when you're talking about, untraceable electronic cash, you're out of your mind if you think that that's a good counterparty risk. Not to mention that the SEC is cracking down on a lot of these lending products like crazy. So you're trying to play with fire is what you're trying to do. You're trying to be a really early adopter of some high risk financial instruments that are not mature yet, and you're going to trade your actual Bitcoin for those high risk financial instruments. So I would not recommend it at all. You're way better off if you just sell the Bitcoin that you have to sell to live a decent quality of life, and just work your ass off to stack as many sats as you can. But if you are going to fall for these tricks, and this is just one of them, right? There's between now and the time that Bitcoin hits $1 billion in purchasing power, there's going to be 50 other of these things. And most people are going to end up falling for one or another, because there's always, fantasy is always a lot better than reality. These guys can tell you, hey, you can keep your Bitcoin. You don't have to spend your Bitcoin, and you get to buy stuff, right? Well, that's a great fantasy. But the reality is we don't have anything approaching a reasonable risk that allows you to do that right now.
Isn't that already kind of like what's happening with companies like BlockFi, where they're actually having issues like withdrawing their previously stored Bitcoin or handed over, I should say, to BlockFi?
Yeah, they've been shut down in several states, as I understand it. And Coinbase tried to roll out some kind of lending product, and the SEC told them no. And that's why they got all pissed off and thought that they could, tweet at the head of the SEC and somehow get what they wanted. I don't know how their current lending product has changed or what that's about, but it's not a good one. But I mean, that said, if you were going to do this, I think Coinbase is the safest place to do it, and that should tell you how dangerous it is right now, and how foolish it would be.
JW, do you foresee any way of this actually working in future? Like, is it de facto can't be done right because of the counterparty risk, or even as a thought experiment, is there a way that this could be done? If there's anyone listening out there that's like, I might start something like this. Like, is there a format that you would entertain as something isn't super risky?
I don't think so, because, well, possibly. So if somebody said, all right, I've got, $10 million in Bitcoin, and I can prove where I got it from, and I'm keeping it in cold storage, and I want to borrow $100,000, and I want to pay 8% interest on it. I could see somebody making that loan, because that's how we do loans a lot of times. The whole world isn't a pawn shop, right? So Coinbase is basically set up a pawn shop for your Bitcoin, where you drop off the asset, and then you make payments on the loan. And if you make those payments and and the pawn shop doesn't steal your Bitcoin, then you get it back. But there's all kinds of lending arrangements that don't require that sort of collateral, right? To somebody to take possession of the collateral. There's a lot of cases where the lender just has a legal right to those assets. They don't actually have control of those assets. So, it's not zero risk for the lender, but it's way more reasonable, I think, for the borrower. So I could see stuff like that happening. The other big factor is that people are way underestimating the storage costs of Bitcoin. If somebody is holding your Bitcoin for you, they're losing a lot of money on that deal. Just it's sitting there because they have to buy insurance, and that insurance is not cheap, and it's only going to go up, in my opinion, because it's so risky that the employees of the company are going to run off with the Bitcoin because it's relatively easy to do. There's always a finite number of employees that have to collude together in order to run off with the Bitcoin. And if the Bitcoin is billions of dollars and it's a dozen employees, it's almost $100 million an employee. That's pretty hard to say no to, especially if the business starts struggling or everybody's stressed out because customers are mad or something. So, I don't think it's ever going to make sense to custody somebody else's Bitcoin. Once the costs are fully realized, right? Like people get pissed off when they have to pay 2% for somebody to store their gold in a warehouse, and they'll take it and bury it in their backyard. But 2% is way underestimating the actual cost of custodying Bitcoin on for somebody else. I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for your input.
Yeah, no, I mean, off topic, but not that off topic, because ultimately what we're talking about is like these business models in Bitcoin, right? So as Bitcoiners, we have some Bitcoin, we have all these people that want to offer us services. It's important, I think, to know whether those services are financially viable, especially when those services require trust. So if they're going to custody something for you, or you're going to take your new friends and hand them off, to somebody like Swan, or you're going to use their hardware wallet. Like, I don't think anybody would be comfortable using a cold card if they were as convinced as I am that business is just completely dead. And the reason that business is dead is that for $6, you can buy for free, you can use Bitcoin Core. That's Satoshi's wallet. It's been worked on by the Bitcoin Core developers for 12 years. It's amazing. It's very user friendly. It's the pinnacle of security. So you've got that working against you already. And then if people are too scared to use that, you've had a lot of people selling these hardware wallets. And the problem with these hardware wallets is that there's the marginal cost on these things is nothing, right? So now you can go buy generic hardware, these MI6 devices, and fairly easily throw some code on there from Blockstream, and you've got a Blockstream Jade for $6. Or you can spend $40 and buy a Trezor, or $40 and buy a Jade. And there's going to be other competitors that are going to be $20 because the hardware itself, even at retail, is $6, right? It's nothing. And cold card is $200. If you buy a cold card and you buy the battery, you buy the cable, you buy all the SD cards and all the jumble and bullshit that you have to buy to make the thing work, you buy the package that most people are going to buy when they go to the website, it's $200. So that's not going to work out. That's not going to last very long. And I don't think most people are super comfortable with the idea that they're buying a hardware wallet for a business that's not going to be in business in a while. But I think that's the cold reality of and here's the thing, like a lot of Bitcoiners, they get offended or it hurts their feelings when I say that. Most businesses that I've started failed. Most businesses that are startups fail. So if like you're looking at like a business that's doing less than 20 or $30 million in revenue, and I can't imagine that cold card's actually doing more than 5, but maybe they are. I don't know. But it's still a small business. It's still a startup in a very competitive environment. If you're counting on those guys being around in 4 years, and you wouldn't buy their jumble if you didn't think that they were going to be there to help you in 4 years, then you just don't know you just don't have any experience with high tech startups at all. Because even the best of them have a very good chance of not being in business in 4 years. So
Yeah, and if that old
Yeah,
saying, I think it's Bezos, is like your margin's my opportunity. If you can buy open source components and Cold Card's selling that for $200, I think the math ends up being that Cold Card doesn't exist for very long unless there's a constant stream of people who are uninformed who are willing to buy it. Maybe there is, who knows? But I see, yeah, your long-term line of thinking makes a whole lot of sense.
yeah. I mean, that is kind of the angle. I think that's always been the angle. But I think things like Spaces and Twitter in general, and just more sophisticated people showing up, that have backgrounds that allow people that have backgrounds in software security. They already have a really weird feeling about just right off the bat using something where somebody else has installed the software for them, right? Like they want the raw hardware and they want to verify the software. They want to build from source. If they can't, they're going to verify that somebody else built from source and signed it, and then they're going to put it on their hardware. These are like very basic sort of hygiene things in software security world. Like even IT guys, right? Like they don't have to be real specialists to kind of have some of this ethos built in. So I think as more and more people show up to Bitcoin, that knowledge is going to, spread more and more like a rapid virus, and it's going to be hard to, it's going to be hard to keep these businesses going. But yeah, I agree with your framing, right? You're counting on people not realizing the true trade-offs in order for your business to exist. Um, and that's maybe it'll work, but I wouldn't recommend letting these guys hold your Bitcoin in either case, actually.
Do you think BlockFi is the next Mount Gox sort of thing, or any of them, Nexo or whatever? I feel like they're all just. I feel like there's going to be a big one, and it's going to psychologically set everything back in a way people aren't considering. Like, because it'll be the employee, it's not going to be like a hacker. It'll be like someone there fucked up bad. And I feel like it'll fuck things up for a few years in a weird way.
I think what $500 million or something has been lost in the last month. I feel like every time I open Twitter, there's $90 million gone, $70 million gone, $50 million gone. So I don't know. I'm just doing math off the top of my head.
That's a
But
lot.
it wouldn't. Yeah, it's a lot, and a lot of it's in these like DeFi token protocol. But the thing is, like, if you take a step back, all these DeFi tokens, they're all Coinbase, right? They're all centralized. They have certain features, but somebody's in control of them. And the way that they get reported is always that there was a hack. The reality is it's almost always an inside job. So when BlockFi loses all the Bitcoin, it's going to be reported as a hack because the insiders aren't stupid enough to at least they're going to give some effort to cover their tracks, right? Even Mount Gox. Most people still think Mount Gox was a hack and not an inside job after all these years. So, and it was clearly an inside job, by the way. So I'm sure that, yeah, I think we will continue to see those things happen. I do think it's very likely it'll be, maybe not with BlockFi if the regulators are just all over them. So I wouldn't place bets on who it's going to be, but in general, like even Coinbase, right? Like people, I would say that's probably if I had to have somebody holding my Bitcoin, it would probably be Coinbase. It's publicly traded. The employees make a ton of money. They're all highly paid, and they've probably spent more than anybody else Unchained Capital is a joke. As far as you might think you hold one of these three keys and feel good about it, but the reality is I'd feel much better about Coinbase holding my Bitcoin.
It's interesting to hear you say that about Unchained. I've been so wary of them, but yet in the back of my head, I felt like maybe they're the prestigious ones or something, but like I stayed away from them.
Yeah, I mean, it's like BlockFi hasn't really targeted hardcore Bitcoiners, and neither has what would be, I don't know, what are the exchanges like Hexa Wallet or whatever, right? These guys they're selling shit coins, or I think BlockFi's had shit coins from the beginning, so we don't really talk about them as much, but their business model isn't any worse or better than Unchained. It's just that Unchained has people that are focused on hardcore Bitcoiners and go to the conferences and say, hey, I love Bitcoin, buy my shitcoin. Whereas a lot of these other like the BlockFi guys, they don't bother as much to even try to appeal to us. So it's an interesting niche to go after, right? I think you'd be better off not going after the hardcore Bitcoiners if you're going to do some bullshit lending product. But they all have the same problem with the SEC, right? The SEC is going to declare all of these lending product securities. I think they've made that pretty clear, and or banking projects, right? You're either going to be a bank or you're going to be a seller of securities. You're not going to be able to be neither, and I don't think that that's going to work out real well, because then you have to be a bank, right? Like Unchained has to. They're not going to be able to pivot and get a banking license. I don't believe that for a minute. And then all of the costs that are associated with it. It's a totally different business, right? They're not going to be able to compete with Chase when Chase is already there, right? They're already in place. They can add Bitcoin a whole lot easier than Unchained can become a nationally chartered bank. So I think they're screwed from that standpoint. Um, but yeah, on the other side, you don't want these things to be declared securities because they're not targeting accredited investors, right? They're not targeting. I don't know what the limit is. I think maybe it's $10 million per person, something like that, in order to be an accredited investor, and then you're treated like an adult as far as the government's concerned, and you can invest in whatever you want. If you don't have that much money, then you're an unaccredited investor, which means if I tried to sell you access to buy into my startup, then I can go to jail for that, right? So I'm not going to do it. But so arguably, that's what a lot of these services have been doing. They've been selling unregistered securities to just regular people, and that's not legal. So that'll be interesting to see if they can even survive all those legal ramifications once all that gets shaken out.
Do you think there'll ever be like a Bitcoin centric sort of like mining focused company that does some sort of lending thing that's more fair? Like they also hold some or you hold some or something, like kind of like what you were talking about with hardware, where you keep your keys. Like if something like that, I maybe might do, but like, yeah, I've BlockFi. I've been with them since the beginning. With like I keep some on there as like a. It's almost, it feels silly because to me it's like it's not mine, but like for the most part, you mentioned the Blockstream Jade. Is that a good wallet to go with? Because I've had other ones.
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean,
It.
if you're gonna do a hardware wallet, I would probably do like the Jade default setup is pretty good because it's a multi-sig setup, but it's super user friendly. I wouldn't, for a large amount of money, I would use Bitcoin Core. It's a project that me and Ben, who's also in the room, Ben Westgate, have been working on for a while, and it's basically just a setup script for Bitcoin Core to make it easier.
Wow, I have Bitcoin Core on my computer. I've been running that a long time, but like, yeah, I could.
Yeah, that's all you need.
Yeah, that's what I've come to realize. I'm like, I don't really need these products from anybody. Like, the benefit of holding it secretly, or not secretly, but like personally holding it. Everyone talks about it, but then there's all these lending products. It's just it's interesting to hear someone say like, "Fuck that shit." Like, you don't need it.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely want to, like, so the project that Ben and I work on steps you through all the best practices of make sure that you clean your hard drive off so it's pristine, then put a trustworthy operating system on it. Probably set up multi-sig with Bitcoin Core, maybe have an offline one if it's a lot of money. Like all that sort of stuff is in the guide. So check out the guide at least and decide what you're going to do and what you're not going to do.
I've read
but yeah, that's all.
I've read through Jameson Lop's stuff in the past a lot, and he kind of was in for me. But I'll definitely check out your stuff too. It's really interesting.
Yeah, he's another failing.
Is he? That's so interesting. I've heard it. He did something recently that some post that I forgot what it was. It seemed silly though. Let me see.
Yeah, I can't keep track of him. I mean, he does something super shady at least every 6 months. He promoted Grin when that looked like it was a pretty viable attack on Bitcoin.
Oh, he's the Casa guy. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so I mean, Casa is a nightmare. Don't use Casa. That's another failing business. They've lost their CEO. They've had tons of turnover, and their business is just a nightmare. Like you cannot recommend it in good conscience to anybody.
I had 100,000 sats on Casa, and then was like, "Fuck this."
Yeah, I mean, well, if you had 100,000 sats, I mean, how many sats were you paying a month for that bullshit
Yeah, it was
anyway.
dumb.
$50
I,
a month.
I did like the basic product, like see what their like I guess what the interface looked like, and the whole the multi-sig. I was interested in that. I feel like Casa was my introduction to that. But like, yeah, fuck them.
Yeah, I mean, there's just not a lot of good business models out there. Casa didn't need to go shady. I guess the other thing that I should mention is like the reason that I believe Corey and I guess by extension, the Swan Bitcoin leadership are being so shady, even though it doesn't look like it makes sense, right? Because I mean, on the surface of it, you've got an exchange that's Bitcoin only, that's been focused on good quality Bitcoin education from day one, and they charge higher fees, but that's been something that a lot of us have said, well, it's worth it, right? And frankly, I mean, once people get a little bit more competent with Bitcoin, then we would probably send them to Strike, right? Like you don't want to spend, you don't want to be buying slugs of $10,000 a piece and paying a high fee. At that point, you definitely want to move over to Strike and not have any
Yeah,
fees, or do OTC or something. And maybe Swan offers better rates OTC, so maybe there's something there as well. But point being, like it was a good place to send noobs that were just going to get started and not spend a ton of money, which again also makes it not a great business for them if they're making money based on volume. But it is what it is. But they're I think in the like Corey personally is in an interesting situation because he's a Silicon Valley guy. He's probably, I don't know this for sure, but he's probably invested in stuff with Brad. He certainly has friends that he's invested in stuff. I don't think he's been super successful. I think he greatly exaggerates the success that he's had. I was in a space with him not long ago, and he said he was invested in like 50 startups that he was trying to get out of to move into Bitcoin. And I just thought, you're completely full of shit. Like you're either the most incompetent investor ever, or you're like Peter Thiel, or you're just full of shit. And I'm confident that he's full of shit. So he definitely wants to exaggerate, his sort of role in Silicon Valley and what a successful angel investor he's been. Um, but but I think the fact that he's selling out, right, over this Brad thing, like somebody that's comfortable and has money, is not going to be that big of a simp over Hex, right? Like the guy's promoting Hex. It's embarrassing. Like you could at least say, yeah, that's fucking embarrassing. Maybe he's a friend, but he really needs to knock that stuff off. If you have a bunch of money, you're not gonna be like, oh well, I won't even mention it, right? Like, and try to calm me down in DMs and try to make me keep it quiet. It doesn't add up. But I do think that he is an investor in Silicon Valley, and he does want access to that deal flow. He does want people like Brad to let him in on the next thing. Um, and so I think there's a certain desperation there for him to maintain those relationships, which makes sense, especially if your business isn't doing well, which is the other thing that I'm hearing, which also makes sense because, I mean, it was basically almost charity for us to send people to Swan with higher fees than Strike, as it was. Um, so, uh, so I think that's what's going on, right? I think that even though it's not good for Swan, it doesn't really make sense for Swan to have people like me and Bob and everybody else that is not a fan of Hex, right? Which there's a lot of us in the Bitcoin space. It doesn't make sense for him to try to like defend Brad to all of us as far as his core business goes. But if the business isn't doing well anyway, it probably does make sense for him personally to try to, maintain those relationships that he hopes are going to bring him, good
But
deals.
JW, so you sit here, like, how are you gonna buy $10,000 worth of Bitcoin on Strike? Like, if we're just max average person, you're maxed out on $1,000. You gotta wait a week every week for those individuals that have those resources to acquire Bitcoins and on at a higher scale. So how are you gonna do that with Strike as opposed to Swan? Like I use Swan. I have no problem with Swan. So it's like coming into space. I was trying to figure out why would the like what were your personal ethos or opinions as to why it wasn't a good service, and I kind of caught you on there on the tail end of that.
Oh yeah, I'll summarize real quick. So I've been a big fan. I've been, friends with Corey, Twitter friends, let's say, for years now. I've sent a lot of people to Swan, and I did it because I could trust them to be Bitcoin only and provide good education for noobs Once they got up to speed, I wouldn't tell them to keep buying on Swan though, because the fees are high. But it was a good on ramp, right? And that was always the value that they said they were bringing to the community. So it was a good deal. But now they're on Twitter and they're basically promoting people that are promoting hex, right? It's not quite that ham-fisted, but essentially that's the problem. So they're in spaces, they're bringing their audience to people like Brad. Brad is a longtime, well-known scammer and fraudster, and that's no good, right? So that's my problem with them, and that's my disappointment with them. But as far as how you buy Bitcoin, if your limits are low on Strike, it's because when you first sign up, you're going to have low limits. But that's going to be the case with every service, including Swan. And what you do is you request higher limits, and then you provide more identity information. So I think you can buy $200 on Strike without even telling them, giving them a photo ID. That's probably the best in the country. I don't know of anybody where you can buy Bitcoin without giving a photo ID, including Swan. They're not going to let you buy shit without a photo ID. But if you go into Strike and then you hit the button to increase your limit and then provide them that information, then they'll increase your limit quite a bit. And then you can, like every other service, you make a couple buys and then you request that your limit gets increased. So it's really not any different. If you were trying to buy, $300,000 worth of Bitcoin, then you take a totally different approach. You call Swan, like who cares, right? You call Coinbase, you call Gemini, maybe you open a support ticket with Strike and you say, hey, I want to buy $300,000 worth of Bitcoin. I'd like to lock it in the next day or two, and I want to know what your rate's going to be on that. And you just probably pick whoever gives you the best rate because that's serious money. In either case, I wouldn't send somebody to Swan specifically.
Yeah, but that's just, if you look at it, even then, they said you get the 5,000. You have to think $5,000. It drops down to like less than 0.99%. I don't think it's necessarily bad. I don't have a bad experience with them. I don't. Like I said, I don't think it's necessarily a bad place. But even then, like I said, with Strike, I use Strike just as well. But the $1,000 limit, I heard it. I heard you can actually. I don't know if this. I'm pretty sure. I think Show was telling me. But if you do the direct deposit, you can actually, your limits are increased. Is that correct?
I haven't had a problem with it. I had to go in and request that my limits get increased 2 or 3 times because I wanted to be able to move $30,000 in a month in and out if I was going to buy a car or something. So I did that. I didn't have any trouble with it.
Okay.
And maybe at volume, here's the big problem with Swan's business model is if you realize that it doesn't make sense to own fiat, you're not going to DCA, right? You're not going to go, okay, I'm taking my paycheck, I've got $1,000, and now I'm going to buy, $150 worth of Bitcoin, and then I'm going to use the rest of the fiat to live on. It flips over. The use case flips over, and what you do is you take that $1,000 in fiat, you immediately convert it to Bitcoin. And then when your phone bill is due, you move $75 out of that $1,000 in Bitcoin into fiat. You touch that dirty shit only for a day or whatever, and then you get your bill paid. That's where fees get really, really important. Because if you buy 5,000 and your fee is 1%, what is that? $50, right? Not the end of the world. But if you're moving in and out regularly, which I'm doing, and I think everybody that's thought this through and realizes that the US dollar is no more trustworthy than XRP or Ethereum, which we'd all throw up in our mouths before we would touch. I think once everybody else gets that mind virus that's taken over my financial life, right? Then you're moving in and out more often, and that's when Strike becomes super valuable to you with 0 fees. It's a much bigger deal. And I don't think Swan's in a position to be able to pivot in any kind of way to fit that new reality. And again, if you're going to do a larger purchase, they're all the same. Like you just want to find, you're going to negotiate the fee on a one-off basis if you're doing OTC. I was also saying, like, look, if you guys still like it, use it, right? I don't care. I'm just saying I can't in good conscience send noobs to it anymore if they're going to end up following the CEO and then get introduced to a hex scammer. Like, it's pretty straightforward, I think. And since the fees are higher, it was basically me being charitable to them anyway and feeling like I was getting some education for the cost that I was paying. And I liked Corey, and I like most of the people that work at Swan. I think they're mostly great guys. So it was kind of like, it's not that much, and I'll have people move off before they do any, real dollar value anyway. Um, but that changes quite a bit if they have hex scammers that they're promoting rooms and hanging out with. And the other thing is that I forgot about this. Somebody mentioned it to me in my DMs. Swan was instrumental in some way with this Machine Greens documentary, which is it's a cool documentary. I think it's great. I'm glad it was produced. Like, scammers actually contribute quite a bit accidentally because they're having to establish credibility before they can slit your throat. And in establishing credibility, they do good things, right? No question about that. And I appreciate it when that happens. Just like I appreciate it when the government actually enforces a just law. I don't count on it, but it's a nice treat when it happens, right? So it turns out, I guess, that Brad and Corey were very involved in creating that documentary together in some way. So there's another tie up there. It's a shame. I mean, you don't have, like, he could still do that documentary and still say, yeah, Brad's a friend. I'm not going to say he's not a friend, but I'm not going to have him, I'm not going to expose him to noobs that follow me because my whole value proposition is I'm a trustworthy guy. This fucking guy's pushing hex, right? Like, it's not complicated. So you can still use them if you want. I'm just explaining why I wouldn't use them. And if you are going to use them, I think it makes even more sense to make sure that you don't leave your Bitcoin there, which they don't even have a problem with, right? They would be happy for you to get your Bitcoin off of their exchange because they don't get paid to hold it for you. No matter how big of a fan you are, I think that's an important takeaway. Their business model looks real shaky to me, so don't leave your coins on the exchange.
Yeah, like I said, I think I don't think I haven't had a problem with Swan. I mean, Corey, Corey's pretty straightforward guy. I mean, I definitely go, I'd go to him direct. I mean, I'm pretty sure you two can have a conversation. But like I said, I'm not here to speak for the man, nor am I here to speak.
No, look, man, I've known him for a long time. Like, this is not me just like throwing a temper tantrum. I've known him for a long time. I was in a space with him that he invited me to 3 or 4 days ago. Brad was there. Brad was trying to say that shitcoins are going to be around forever, countering me explaining what's going on with the SEC. I said, look, Brad, the only reason you're saying that is that you're a longtime scammer. Corey interrupted and said, I don't want any personal attacks, and I kind of blew it off. And then, today, somebody put together a really great little collage of Brad shilling hex. And so I said, hey, Corey, you probably should not have this guy on the stage anymore. And then we DM'd for probably 20 minutes back and forth and discussed pros and cons of ethics, in various ways. And then he blocked me. So, I'm not uninformed about the man. And I'm just saying, it's pretty obvious now, if you send your noob friends to Swan and they end up following Corey, they're going to get exposed to shit like hex. If you're cool with that, then you're cool with it. But that's a whole different reality than I think we were dealing with. At least I expected to be dealing with.
I got you on that. But yeah, it's just, I was curious about that. And then, like I said, I've heard you mention some of the few other, Bitcoin businesses. I think we got to kind of give some leeway. Like I said, again, just personal opinion, and you can kind of tell me your opinions on it. I mean, to get this space and, to get development, and you want people to, contribute, either free and open source or just even open source, products that, you got to kind of give them some leeway to kind of, grow and build. I mean, this is a 13-year industry, or, market, whatever, how you want to define it, your own personal choice. But I think we got to kind of, I think it's a lot of, build stuff, break stuff. Is that,
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying, man. And I appreciate where you're coming from on that. I think the reality is, though, like, if you've been around Bitcoin for a while, we've heard that angle one way or another for a long time, and it doesn't actually work out, right? So previously, it wasn't Bitcoin only companies that were just, I would say Corey's essentially, I don't think he's doing it on purpose, but I think he's acting as a roper, right? I do think there are people that are doing it very much on purpose. Spaces really works great for this, because if you're on Twitter and you retweet a scammer, people get pissed. But if you're on Twitter and you're in a space and you make a scammer a speaker, nobody really gets all that upset. right? At least not yet. I think the community is realizing how this works and the education is happening, and people are going to be starting to respond the same way they would if you retweeted a scammer. But we're not there yet. And so these people they're hosting spaces like LogScale is a perfect example of this. They're hosting spaces and they're just having scammers around, right? And so that's my problem with Corey. All you have to do is like host a space or be in a space. Your audience is going to show up. If there's a scammer that's a speaker, some percentage of your audience is going to end up thinking he's a good guy and following him, right? It's a tacit endorsement unless you're actively saying, "Hey, don't follow this asshole because he's a scammer," or be careful because this guy's an asshole. So I don't think he's doing it on purpose, but I think the net is the same. And the argument before with shitcoins was, well, we need to draw on all these JavaScript developers. We need all these little characters to show up and help build the industry. And the reality was, how many innovations came out of shitcoins? Zero. They never did anything of value. They created tons of marketplace confusion. We've had years of noobs buying shit like XRP and Hex and all this filthy garbage, and it's caused the regulators to think that it was a very scammy space and probably slowed Bitcoin adoption on multiple levels. And what technology did they ever deliver? Zero, zilch, nothing, because they're not in the business of actually building. They're in the business of fucking people. And so they focused on that, and they did that pretty well, and they deceived people, but they never actually built anything. And if you look at something like Swan, okay, let's say that we need to give them some leeway. If I give them leeway to introduce people to Hex or introduce people that are going to introduce them to Hex, what do they do here, right? Like, what's their value proposition? It's nothing. They don't do anything. These guys are not like Blockstream that are spending millions of dollars a year on liquid development or lightning development or anything like that. They literally just have a very simple web page that allows you to buy Bitcoin, and they promise to give good education. So if they're not going to be trustworthy to do that, they don't have any role to play at all.
Yeah, I think a good example to kind of highlight what you're saying, JW, would be to look at like Coinbase and how Coinbase evolved. Like, go dig up some of Brian Armstrong's tweets from like 6 years ago, and the dude, for all intents and purposes, was a Bitcoin maximalist. Like, he understood the value proposition of Bitcoin. He understood the economics of Bitcoin. He understood that Bitcoin was going to become the dominant global money. And what happened, right? He was working with the people in the space, right? Just being this really good guy who's trying to build a successful company. And his CTO, Charlie Lee, ended up getting Litecoin listed on Coinbase. And how many people have been scammed by Litecoin over the years? And I would, like, you look at Coinbase now, and I think most people would call Coinbase a net negative. Like, the amount of spam that I see from Coinbase because of the amount of money that they've taken from unsophisticated investors that have been duped into throwing their life savings at Ponzi scams, right? That's how Coinbase has made the majority of their money. It hasn't been by being a principal business. It was in the interest of trying to grow the space and expand access, whatever that even means. And now, like, every time you click on a YouTube video, you're going to see an advertisement for Coinbase's Learn program, which is going to try to shill you a basket of 10 or 20 different scam coins. These are all net negative behaviors for people and people's well-being, and I would argue for the space. Like, I use that term to mean a much different thing than a lot of these two-faced scammers do. And like, again, like, I would agree with you. Like, I know Corey. I like Corey. I consider Corey a friend. I think Corey's a good guy. But Swan itself is really, like you said, just a fancy front end with a lot of really good marketing, right? A lot of efforts for outreach and education, and I think that those are good things. The business model of Swan itself isn't very innovative. It's someone else's back end. All right. So full disclosure, I don't know the technical specifics of how exactly Swan works from top to bottom, but considering that they custody their Bitcoin with a prime trust, they are operating on someone else's Bitcoin backend, right? And you're interacting with the Swan front end. This is totally different than even a company like River, who will soon be a money transmitter in all 50 states and has built their own front end and back end Bitcoin system. You're just talking about like two totally different business models, and it's not necessarily derogatory to point that out. That just is.
I mean, a lot of people. I mean, there's several companies. Strike uses Prime Trust. I mean, I don't have an issue with Prime
That's true.
Trust. You know, so
that's a good point.
I have no issue.
Right. But I mean, that's fair. But look at what does Strike do, right? They've invested a ton into Lightning and a lot of other things,
and
so there is a lot of IP.
Strike has,
and with Swan, the value in the IP has been their trustworthiness, right? That's it. Like they are, you can trust them to help noobs get onto board into Bitcoin and give them, education.
Strike has built a lot of innovative technical implementations of Bitcoin. Yes, like their actual Bitcoin custody is with Prime Trust, but you can't you can't sit there and say that what Strike has done is not innovative. Like it's incredibly innovative, especially when you look at the way that Strike allows the average everyday user to access Lightning. I could make the argument, we could make the argument that the back end maybe leaves a bit to be desired if it's all done through Prime Trust, but there is certainly innovation happening, and that's kind of the point I'm making, is that there's a difference like between those types of businesses, those two businesses. One is adding a lot of value in terms of how it's innovating technically, and the other one is providing value in the sense that it's satisfying the market demand for people to buy Bitcoin, and it's delivering a lot of quality education. But there isn't a lot of technical innovation there, is what I'm saying.
Which again, I mean, it doesn't matter. It was great for what it was, right? Like I was not a fan of it for what it was. It was like, okay, that's cool. You guys are kind of trying to put an interesting front end and provide good Bitcoin education. Like, great. And I did try to encourage them, like, hey, you guys need to start thinking about user experiences that are a little bit more conducive to my day-to-day life. Because if I'm right and everybody ends up getting on zero fiat, your current workflows aren't going to work for me, right? And they don't work for anybody that is going to be infected with this get on zero fiat mindset. But I wasn't like super frustrated when they said that they weren't going to make that a priority. It's just like, all right, well, it is what it is. The problem is when, in my mind, the value proposition is, hey, you can trust us to educate noobs, and now I can no longer trust them to educate noobs. So it's just like that scene in Office Space, right? Like, what is it you do here? Like, I just don't know how you could possibly be useful to me. And if you guys don't feel that way, then that's fine, right? Like, if you think, oh no, I think it's fine. Maybe the workflow in Swan is great and the newsletters that come out are great, and you don't think it's likely that somebody's going to end up following Corey and get introduced to Brad, and maybe it's not all that likely, right? Maybe I'm over exaggerating it, the impact that people have. But from my perspective, I think Spaces is the future of Bitcoin education. I think people are naturally going to follow the CEO. And I think after multiple times, and frankly, after the point where I'm like, look, dude, just don't have him as a speaker anymore if you don't want people like me to be upset about it. And he blocks me, right? At that point, I'm like, all right, well, I just don't trust you anymore. So, I mean, you guys are welcome to trust them to do that if that's a role that you think you still want him to perform for you. But I would say you'd be way better off just sending people to Strike. They're going to have a much more streamlined user experience. They're going to have much lower fees, and then tell them to follow people like Adam Back and Nick Szabo. I wouldn't tell them to follow Corey at this point. And there's a ton of us, right? Tell them to follow people like Heavily Armed Clown and Ben Westgate. Like, there's a lot of good plebs that are not here because we have to stay in the deal flow with some assholes in Silicon Valley, I don't know, just Mike Alfred, right? Who is an early investor in Swan. Like, his nickname is Mike Alfraud because he's an absolute piece of shit, right? There's a lot of good people that you don't have to, that you can send noobs to that don't include that list of shit.
It's a good point that there's like a certain level of autonomy that certain people in Bitcoin have that others don't. And again, it's one of those things, like, I'm not even saying it to be disparaging. It's just true. Like if you're wrapped up in deals with a lot, like if you've been in Bitcoin long enough, like you kind of start to wonder, man, like how do some of these scammers or some of these people who have just said time and time and time again, said so much dumb crap over and over and over, how do they keep getting audiences? How do they keep getting like they're always like these people, like it doesn't matter how big of shitcoiners they are, what they say that's stupid, how many people they wreck and ruin, how many people they lead astray. It doesn't matter. Like they still get invited to the events. They still get to go up on stages and speak. They still go on all the podcasts. And it's because it's a network and it's a money-making network. And in particular, like in the venture capitalist world, it's a venture capitalist clique. And, you know, this is just how the world works, right? Like I get it. I understand it. I'm not here to try to change it from this Twitter space. But there are certain incentives that come along with that and certain behavior patterns that emerge where people, you know, like can't say certain things and have to act certain ways and have to tolerate certain behaviors around their business partners. It's just the honest truth.
Yeah, I mean it's the spaces and you know the people in here. You know it's touch my dick, I touch your dick. You know, type of operation going on, but it's yeah
Hey,
that
I'm sorry to interrupt, guys. I actually have to jump on another call, but I can leave the space open if somebody else wants to co-host it, and I can change the title to something less inflammatory, and then I can be back in like 25 minutes, or I can just shut it down. You guys let me know if somebody wants to co-host.
it's all good. I'm about to finish eating breakfast here, but thanks for hosting the space. Like I said, I called it on the back and I was trying to catch you know, I definitely agree with definitely enjoy listening to your insight and stuff like that. You have a good day, my man.
Right on.
I'll let it go because I got to jump in another call here too soon.
Okay, right on. Yep, good chat, guys. We'll talk more on Twitter. X21, I know you wanted to talk about Cold Card. We'll do that again next time. Sorry, man, we ran out of time.